Hi there and welcome to Point of View. I'm Mark Leishman and my guest this week is Alison, a Waikato vet, a fourth generation farmer, and she has just completed a Master of Science this year which focused on how the upper Waikato dairy farms can be profitable while achieving the best possible environmental impact. Well, she's worked for Nestlé in Australia, the Commonwealth Bank in Australia, and was elected to the New Zealand Veterinary Board in 2015. She's been a finalist in the NZI Sustainability Campaign and also the 2015 Women of Influence Award. So we're delighted to have Alison with us.
Thank you.
Congratulations on that, and particularly, I guess, the Master of Science, because you've just completed that this year, and you've got how many children?
3 teenagers.
3 teenagers.
Yes.
How the heck can you do that and also do, the farming side of your life and the vet work?
Oh, it's all a juggle. Just got to be organised with your time, really, and be focused.
So it's all about time management.
Yeah. And you've got to have some fun as well.
Yeah. Why did you decide to do the Masters?
I've always been really interested in how agriculture affects catchments. So as a vet, you're diagnosing problems with individual animals and populations. But for me, I always was interested in the wider context of how those populations and those activities affected catchments. So I went on to do a Masters in Ecology and Agricultural Effects on Receiving Water, which is quite a current issue in New Zealand.
Indeed, yeah. So what did you decide, or what did you aim to do with the Masters when you completed it? Was there an ultimate goal? Or is there, should I say?
An ultimate interest of how agriculture can adapt to functioning efficiently inside ecosystem health limits. So I really wanted to understand what ecosystem health limits were, and the studies really helped me understand that, and also understand how we can farm more profitably inside these limits.
So what do you see are the biggest challenges to agriculture, in New Zealand over the next decade? So?
Look, I think our consumers are really looking for safe and green food and ethical food as well. And I think part of that is around being very legitimate with your claims. And I think the big challenge for New Zealand agriculture is that we are legitimate with our production, and we're really resource efficient, and we can do it without damaging our receiving environment. So that's a big challenge. That's not only from a climate change perspective, but also receiving water bodies and protecting our soils as well.
You brought up the word safe. Now, safe has another connotation. Safe have put an ad in the Guardian newspaper, and it's caused a great deal of controversy, the footage released. What are your thoughts on, I guess, firstly, from a vet's point of view, the footage that was released?
These are the challenging things that agriculture's got to front foot, and I found it disturbing from the point of view that that's come out from within our country and gone international, and it's devastating, really. But I think we need to take a step back and really look at where our critical points are of risk in terms of all our agricultural production systems. And it may be that we need to really review what we're doing with all our systems and where the key risk points are. So quite clearly the transport sector is a real challenge for us there, and we probably need some third-party auditors in there going through and doing a proper HACCP process right across that paddock to the plate point.
Do you see it? I mean, the Prime Minister's referred to it as a sort of economic sabotage, really. The fact that the ad went international rather than just sorting it out here within our country. Do you see that as being a real problem for us?
I do. And I think we've got, there are parts and points in our agricultural systems that are vulnerable at the moment, and we'll talk a bit more about the water quality challenge, whereby we need to be really front-footing this a lot better and making sure that the systems that are guiding behaviours on farm are a lot clearer.
Okay, well, let's look at that water quality across New Zealand now, particularly in lowland and coastal areas. It's not so good. Can we expect to have swimmable rivers like we did when we were young kids in the future, given the policies in place at the moment?
I think the current policies in place are not going to give us swimmable rivers. We've still got quite a rapid rate of decline. If we think about what's happening in our lowland and pastoral catchments, we've gone from 40% of them having high nitrogen levels, nitrogen levels that'll create algal growth, to now 60% in 2014. So that's a significant increase over the last 15 to 20 years. We need to look at what permissive frameworks have allowed that to happen. We've continued to claim that we're clean and green, but in fact we're getting worse all the time. We also need to give clear signals to farming, but also the expansion that's continuing, because that's more of the problem than what's actually been happening on these farms that have been there 20 or 30 years.
So you mean the intensification or the farms getting bigger?
I'm talking about the new growth that's occurring. So let's think about the government growth agenda, for example, which is certainly a good intent to increase the value that's coming from our agricultural exports, but it's also driven this increase of conversion of land. So we've had a significant increase in dairying conversions on vulnerable landscapes. So we'll just talk about Canterbury, for example, where we've had probably to the tune of 300 to 400,000 hectares of irrigation in the last 2 decades on extremely vulnerable soil types. So 70% of those soils are actually light soils, so they're quite leaky. Now, if I'll just explain that a little bit more, what I mean by leaky is in terms of the nitrogen and pathogens or bugs tend to run through those soils quite readily. And so we might have a leaching amount, say in the upper Waikato, of about 25 to 35 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year, leaching from these dairy farms. But in Canterbury, on these gravelly, leaky soils, it'll be to the tune of 150 to 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. So we've also got the challenge that there's the activities on the surface of the land don't take long to show up in the water bodies and the groundwater. So in Canterbury we've got Selwyn and we've got the Hines catchment that are now extremely over-allocated in terms of nitrogen loads, and the farmers are being forced to come back by about 50% in terms of their nitrogen reduction. Now that's a big ask for any business to make those changes, but at the same time we've got the government encouraging further intensification, like the Central Plains water, and also in Hines there's 30 to 40,000 hectares of extra irrigation going in.
So the soil is such that the stuff just goes straight through, the nitrogen and as you say, the bugs and everything else.
About 70% of the Canterbury soils are those leaky soils.
And ultimately ends up in the water in the aquifer? Or
shallow groundwater at the moment, for example, in Ashburton is above the World Health Standards for drinking water. So that's happened in a period of sort of 15 to 20 years. So it shows us how quickly these things can happen. But the other thing is that our rivers are stressed in Canterbury. That's from over-abstraction. So we've taken a lot from the surface water. And that stresses the river, as well as what's happening in the groundwater that then gets back to those rivers, and you get the increase in nitrogen and phosphorus in there, and the result is algal growth. So that means we can't take our dogs down there, we can't swim in there, we can't enjoy those rivers like we used to. So we need 2 things to happen. One is the reduction in nutrients that are leaving that root zone on the farms, but also we need those flows in those rivers to come back up.
Yeah, so how do we do that?
Well, that's a really good question. So in New Zealand, should we be continuing to take water from these vulnerable rivers and catchments to irrigate pasture? I'd argue I don't think it's a very sensible way to use our water, because to irrigate pasture we use about let's say in Canterbury, 500 to 600 mils per hectare, or 6 megalitres a hectare a year. Are we making a lot of world-class protein out of it? Yes, we're making about 500 kilos of milk protein, or 700 kilos of milk protein per hectare from that land, from that 6 megalitres of water. But could we be making some other proteins with greater profits from potentially half that water? Yes, we could. What about faba beans? What about other vegetable proteins using half the water and quite probably leaching a whole lot less?
So, I mean, it's a complete change of mindset, isn't it? Well, I suppose that, Canterbury was always known for its cropping, wasn't it? I mean, it's the wheat bowl of New Zealand in many respects. So, it's not like they haven't the experience of growing stuff. But I suppose that the lure of the dairy, particularly when the price was right up there, was just too great.
Absolutely, but also when I stand back and look at, and I farmed in Australia for 15 years, and Australia is an interesting place to farm, a good place to farm. But
there's no water either.
Well, there is water, but the farmers there had their waters actually clawed back for the Murray.
Right.
I was watching what was happening in New Zealand and wondering how long it was going to keep going for with this allocation of water for pasture. But you're right, it's a bit of a change of mindset. We need to be actually talking about profitability rather than production and output. We need to be thinking about how much profit we're making from any megalitre or million litres of water that we use. We don't do this in New Zealand. We don't do it well, or we don't communicate it well. And we need to be looking at profitability and true protein production from each million litres of water we're using.
Actually, you've got something on your side. The fact that you're a farmer yourself is a major plus, because a lot of people would say, oh, well, academic telling us what to do sort of thing. But, you've got that on your side. You know how the whole system works.
That's right. And look, I'm certainly not anti-farming. I'm pro-farming that's going to be economically resilient for the long term. But remember, our economy is fully dependent on our environment. And if we're going to stuff our environment or stuff the receiving waters or the water we depend on within a matter of 15 to 20 years, it's not sustainable.
It always intrigues me about, the thought of damming, getting great tracts of water and retaining it over the winter so we can use it in the summer makes a great deal of sense to me. And is that true or not?
Look, you can certainly dam things and water.
Or create reservoirs or whatever.
Absolutely. There's a price in doing that, and you have to make sure you get the hydrology right, and you have to think about, obviously, like the Ruataniwha Dam, for example, who's going to pay for the construction of those dams, and then who's going to buy the water. And in the case of Ruataniwha, for example, I think it's around 26 cents per cubic metre. If you're going to irrigate pasture, for example, for a dairy farm, or convert a sheep and beef farm to a dairy farm there, your ongoing annual water cost at 26 cents is going to be about $1,000 to the hectare per year. Right. So you've got to know that you're going to have a pretty good milk price, $7 to $8 equivalent long term, to fund that sort of an operation. So if we're going to be building more dams to irrigate, use that water for pasture, for dairying, we need to think seriously about it if it's going to be economic at a long-term average milk price. Maybe that water needs to be used for other opportunities, like I was talking about before, with horticulture or arable or high-value crops. Yeah,
you really think that we should be moving away from the dairy, that intensity, and just spreading the load a bit, crops, etc.
I'm coming from the angle, are we getting the best bang for our buck with our water in terms of protein production per million litres of water that's being used, and is it delivering the greatest profit for the resource that's being used? And also we've got to take into account the amount of pollution that's being caused as a result of that activity.
My guest is Alison Dews, and fascinating as well. We'll have another chat, another 15 minutes with Alison after the break, and we'll take more look at perhaps Ruataniwha and why there's been some resistance to it, and also the state of our soil as a whole. That's coming up next on Point of View. Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Mark Leishman. My special guest is Alison Dews. And Alison, is pastoral agriculture in its present form on the right track, do you think?
I think pastoral agriculture in New Zealand, and that's dairy, sheep and beef, is really going to be pushed to become more profitable, if it can, inside what are becoming tighter resource constraints. And that's going to be challenging. We're going to need technological advances. We're going to need farmers to better understand their businesses and the drivers of profit in their business. We've had a perception that more production is totally aligned with more profit, but I think we're understanding now that there's not a direct relationship. And in fact, in a lot of cases in New Zealand, and certainly, we had a lot of growth and promotion of the dairy industry and high milk prices, and there was a lot more output was chased, and palm kernels supported that as well. I think, and certainly my masters showed that sometimes the more modest farms that are not so heavily stocked, that are just feeding fewer, better cows well, are actually a whole lot more profitable and resilient at a range of milk prices.
Are these some of the myths in the agricultural industry, do you think?
Look, for the last 20 or 30 years, we've had free growth. We've had, if you like, quite permissive regimes, and that we can just go and intensify more land quite quickly. There's been no limits. Our thinking's been based on capital gains, gathering more resources and growing and getting more milk solids per hectare, for example. So the drivers here, with inflating land prices, have been around more. The reality is now we've now got constrained areas where we can keep growing to, so you can't just keep going into the foothills and up the steep hills. So we've got to focus on what we've got. We've got tighter limits in terms of what our agriculture can do to the receiving environment, and we've got these incredibly volatile milk and commodity prices, which is a world that we haven't really had to live in for the last 20 years. So these are our big challenges, finding out how we can run profitable businesses inside limits and make legitimate claims about our products over the next 10 or 15 years. And that we may be having to include agriculture in a carbon, some sort of carbon accounting in the future as well in New Zealand.
Yeah. Do we have the leadership to be able to cope with those issues, do you think? And what is the leadership looking like in the future in farming?
Well, what about the leadership now? I don't think that there's strong leadership to help give farmers confidence to front foot this. But what I do find in my work is that there are already leading farmers out there who are innovating and thinking well ahead of the curve. And they are already showing us. In fact, some of these leaders and innovators have already got the answers of where we need to go to in the next 10 years. And that's really positive. What we need to do is actually really understand what those farmers are doing, what they're doing with their system, how these farmers think, and understand their drivers, and have a good close look at that. So it's a bit of a scoping study. It's a bit what I did with my masters, and found that there are good farmers out there already well ahead of the game, half the footprint, twice the profit, and doing it with just a focus on doing some of the basics really, really well.
Is that because they've concentrated on their agriculture and not been on committees and tried to get ahead in that sense?
Oh, it could be that, but it could be also that they intuitively understood the right way to do things.
Are there many of them around?
I think there are, but it's probably like any demographic profile. You'll just have, they'll be in the top 5% or top 10%, and they tend to keep to themselves, those sort of guys. Yeah.
So how do we get that message across? How do we improve our situation?
Well, there's a number of things we need to do. We need to understand good measures for profitability that go across all sectors, so that we're comparing, a well-run sheep and beef farm with a well-run deer farm, for example, with a well-run arable farm and a dairy farm, so that because what we've had here is this headlong rush into dairy from sheep and beef, or from these other extensive systems. And in many cases, if we were concentrating on the right profitability measures and the effects and accounting for pollution, we might have had a second and a more thoughtful look at what we were doing. So moving forward, we need to be using the right measures, we need to be looking at our innovators, and we need clear leadership on what those innovators are doing. Now, this might come from business. It might not come from regional councils setting rules. It might come from businesses that are really wanting to prove they've got a legitimate product that they're marketing to the world.
The quality of our water, I mean, is it improving? Is the fact that farmers are fencing off waterways, riparian rights, all that sort of stuff, is that having an effect? Is that another way to improving the future?
Certainly keeping stock out of water bodies is important, but things such as the Sustainable Dairy Accord, where it is just fencing off waterways that are permanently flowing, is not going to be enough to fix things, because not only have they been asked to, they haven't been asked to have a riparian zone, which is what actually stops the sediment and pathogens and phosphorus getting into those waterways. We have to deal with our intensity on the land, because our soils are also vulnerable. We're getting a lot of erosion, we've got a lot of compaction in our soils. We've actually had years of over-fertilisation as well. So a lot of our soils are really rich in phosphorus now, and that, of course, is making its way to receiving waters. So the 4 things that affect receiving rivers and lakes is nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, or that soil loss, and the pathogens, the bugs that pretty much come from those activities.
And we've got all those happening. That's the
yes,
big issue.
We have, and a lot of our lowland rivers are affected because of not only nitrogen and phosphorus in there, but the pathogen levels as well. So 62% of our lowland rivers are unfit for swimming because of the pathogen loads.
So science plays a big part in trying to put this right?
That's right, but science does, and good monitoring is really, really important, and looking at long-term trends, even if they're 20-year trends. However, we can't use the excuse that we don't have enough science to delay this, because just like anything, you can't wait. I'm a vet, you can't wait till the whole herd's died to put in a stopgap. You've actually got to say, okay, we're losing a few things here. We have to operate with precautionary principle here and put in measures to fix the trend.
Can you see that happening?
I think it has to happen. I mean, then we get out to a social licence to operate, and can agriculture keep operating in a way where the public's having to foot the bill to clean up, and the public, say in Canterbury, are losing a lot of their swimming sites. We can't keep doing this. There's got to be a happy medium here, and actually all farmers, they enjoy swimming in the rivers as well. So we've got to be working together as communities with legitimate measures and frameworks to change behaviours. Because
that's often the argument, isn't it? Well, we as farmers live on the land, they're our rivers, our kids swim in them, so
Absolutely.
Why would we try and destroy them? Is that a valid argument?
Oh, totally. I have not met a farmer that doesn't want to look after their local environment. It comes back to leadership and having clear messaging and clear guidelines on where to go.
Do you think we can still call ourselves clean and green? I mean, we go for this 100% pure thingy, and it's all very nice and good, but is it accurate anymore?
We can still call ourselves clean and green. Whether or not it's legitimate or not is another matter. And we've possibly, I think, our wiggle room is running out, and we do need to move quicker and more deliberately than we've ever had to move before. So that's our challenge.
Perhaps ironically, things like the safe footage that's, the ad in the UK paper, etc., is a bit of a wake-up call, and perhaps we should look, holistic at the whole of agriculture and, really think, well, wait a minute, are we really doing this right?
That's exactly what I've been saying as well, and other groups that I work with, that actually we need a risk assessment of our agriculture, and just for our own self-protection, and say, okay, where are our critical points that are going to be hazards for us in future in terms of social licence to operate and global expectations or our consumer expectations. And if we know that our consumers want safe, green and ethical food, we've got to put the magnifying glass on all our systems and say, where can we not tick these 3 boxes? And I think we'll find a few places we need to act on them.
And in terms of the future, I mean, are you optimistic, or are you sort of somewhat fearful, with your experience now, particularly with water and the quality of water?
For New Zealand, I'm optimistic for New Zealand in that I think New Zealand's got an incredible wealth, environmental wealth, that still is not completely squandered. So we've got still a great story to tell. We also have a very kind climate here. It's not like Australia. We're very rich in resources, and we've got innovative people. And actually New Zealand's just like a village. And if we decide to work together, we've got a lot of very smart people. that when they turn their mind to doing the right thing together, we can actually change quite quickly. So a lot of it's about our attitude.
Well, I love your attitude, and I wish you well in your quest to change the thinking of people in the agribusiness community here. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Alison Jews, my special guest there, a Waikato vet, dairy farmer, and someone who really cares. Thanks very much for being on the show. And that's our point of view for another week. We'll be back with the final point of view at the same time next week, right here on Country TV.